Video's live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for the Cowichan Valley Regional District for Wednesday, January 26th. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish First Nations. We have an agenda before us. Do we have any late items for the agenda, either from staff or directors? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated? Moved. Seconded. Thank you very much. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item of business is adoption of the Committee of Whole meeting minutes of January 12th, 2022.
The recommendation is that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of January 12th, 2022 be adopted. Can I have a motion? Moved. Seconded. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No business arising from the minutes, no participants for public input period or delegations. So on to staff reports. The first item, R1, is a report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding a transit system update on Next Ride technology, and this report is for information.
Anybody have any questions or observations about that report? Seeing no hands, do we need a motion to accept it for information, or is that inferred?
No motion is required.
Thank you very much. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2 is another report from the Facilities and Transit Division regarding the Memorandum of Understanding of the Nanaimo Cowichan Express update. And the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that the MOU between the Cowichan Valley Regional District, the Regional District of Nanaimo, and BC Transit for the operation of the interregional transit service for the 5-year period from March 28th, 2022 to March 27th, 2027 be approved.
I guess before I entertain a motion, I'd be happy to have a bit of discussion on this. I see Mr. Wakeham has popped up on the screen. The last time we talked, there was some question as to whether the board at the Nanaimo Regional District was going to be satisfied with this and approve this. Did that go ahead? Do you know, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Their meeting is tomorrow. So from staff's perspective, there's no concern that was raised by the RDN staff to us, and we don't expect it at this time. That's why we brought this report back for your review and approval, hopefully today, and then we would update the RDN staff as well. But their meeting is tomorrow.
All right. Any other hands? Director Active.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just bringing this up because I've seen a lot of it in the news lately, just about the crisis that transit is in due to the pandemic. So I'm wondering if we're doing any kind of long-term planning that has that kind of SWOT analysis that costs are going to continue to rise and ridership is going to continue to go down, and yet we're expanding. So it's just something that I think we need to address to the communities and to have staff's input on that. If now's the time, that's my question.
Mr. Wakeham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things with regard to what you might be reading in the media, specifically in the Victoria area, where they had some issues with some route disruption with drivers not available due to COVID. We don't have those issues in the Cowichan Valley. We connected with BC Transit, our operator, and we don't see any issues yet. Fingers crossed it stays that way. With regard to going forward and financially, that's something that we're going to do all the time. We always bring forward expansion opportunities. This one, the RDN, has been on the books for many, many years, as you know. We will find out in about around February the 20th with regard to the provincial budget with any expansions going forward. As you know, we have two other ones. We have custom service and we have Route 5 bidirectional improvement as well. Both those, we will get an update from BC Transit in the next month. And if there is if there's an inkling that the province will not be offering expansion, we'll bring that back to you in time to adjust our 2022 budget. But in terms of ridership is actually doing quite well on the conventional. It is not doing well on the commuter. We know that, the interregional to Victoria, but staff are still feeling confident that the service going north to Nanaimo is going to be different. It's not just for commuting workers like the one in Victoria is. So that's just a bit of a quick update from where we stand at this point.
I don't see Director Stone. He did text me to say he'd be here, and I know he had some major concerns about this.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir.
I'm waving my arms around and I can see myself on the screen.
I think, well, your video is not showing up on our feed. But,
Weird.
But Director Stone, I'm sure you'll have some input on this because you had some concerns at the last meeting. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and we worked through them, and I understand the limitations in the near term. And based on some experienced conversations with folks at RDN and our staff and BC Transit, I would happily move the recommendation.
And it's seconded by Director Morrison. All right. Yeah, I do see you're in the room, Director Stone, but your video for some reason isn't showing up. So if you need to speak, just let me know orally if you could. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sorry, I turned it back off and on again, and I guess it worked this time. There you
Okay,
go.
good. I'm going to put myself on the speakers list because I continue to have major concerns about this. You know, the staff report says on the Chemainus piece that we talked about last time, too bad, so sad, catch a bus from Chemainus to Ladysmith or Duncan and then get on board. That just doesn't work. I'm sorry, but that, you know, that's almost insulting, especially when in the context of the greater Duncan area, we have 4 stops within 2 kilometers of each other, but people are expected to catch that bus to Ladysmith or Duncan to join in with this. And we also have not addressed the concerns about drop-offs or pickups within the jurisdictions. I understand what's going on there, but, you know, when I read the staff report and it says, well, let's just try it for a few years and we'll sort this stuff out later, why don't we sort it out now? It just, you know, I mean, to me, I guess it really comes down to, do we want no service or do we want to pay for this service, which is not a service at all for a good chunk of a densified urban core in the district of North Cowichan. And we're going to be paying for it, and we're not going to have the service for those residents. And on that basis, I'm not interested in this. To me, it has to go back and have some further discussion. I mean, if as inferred in the staff report, yeah, we'll try it and we'll sort it out in a few years, why can't we sort it out now? That's my point. I would sooner have no service than an inferior service starting up too soon. I think it needs another look. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I read the staff report differently. It sounded to me, and I think Mr. Wakeham can clarify, that in the short term, they will look at an ability to perhaps have a stop off at the highway at Chemainus. They didn't actually say the highway, but that's the logical place. And in the meantime, there are 2 buses, and I agree with you, it's a little bit challenging, but it's, you know, the people aren't going to be walking up the hill. It's going to be people that don't have a vehicle that will have to use that if they are going there. And so, Mr. Wakeham, can you tell me if I'm correct that you're going to be attempting in the next while to see if you can create that stop? But this is basically to pass it so that tomorrow they can pass it at RDN.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Marsh, if I may just make a few comments here. So before I ultimately answer your question, I want to remind a few things here, because staff understand why the asks were there, and it was the 2. Can we add a stop close to Chemainus and pick up and drop off in both locations? Staff did quickly look at where could we add a stop in Chemainus, and it's not quite that simple and easily to be done. We looked at Smiley Road, we looked at behind the Co-op gas station. We have to do a lot of testing and take a 40-foot bus and see if it works, and BC Transit won't support going through private property, which would be the Co-op gas station as an example. And so unfortunately, it's really late in the implementation of this new route, and to add any stop changes is really not doable at this time. have to sort of remember that the planning and the scheduling and even getting approvals, we have to seek approval from municipalities. We're waiting still for approval from North Cowichan with regard to the stop by Cowichan Commons. And so we have to get all those things done. And the marketing materials are in the final stages. And so, you know, the challenge really is you have to remember that even within the Cowichan Valley, our conventional system is not interlined with the commuter system going to Victoria. People that live in Lake Cowichan, for example, cannot get on a CVRD bus and get to Duncan in time to catch the bus to go to Victoria. This is no different. This service is wedged in between two regional conventional services, if you will. And that's why we keep reminding you that it is meant to be an express service, not stops on every area that we have, because that's not the way it's going to work. We also have a partner in the north that wants it to be an express service and not to keep adding stops in the Duncan area. Yes, there are 3 stops close together in Duncan, in the hub, which is at Village Green Mall, and the train station, because you drive right by there. We considered dropping one of those. The logical stop to drop would be the train station, but it doesn't save enough time because it's on the route anyway. When you go and try and add a stop in Chemainus, whether you're going to do a roundabout or go on a side road, it adds time, and we don't have any more time. One option would be, if we added it, we would have to reduce the number of trips from 7 a day down, because we don't have enough time. It's very tight. And our partner in the north might not be supportive of that because they would be affected. So what we're suggesting is, we understand that, you know, there are some limitations within the CVRD conventional service where the conventional routes, quite a few of them do line up. My ballpark guess is about 35% would line up where people could get from specific regions, areas within the CVRD and hook up to it. But again, I have to remind you, this is an express service. We have to have a method where our residents can get to the key stops and then get onto this. The intent is to get it up and running, and we're trying to really hopefully get support from both regions, because this is only, you know, 6 weeks away from doing this. And I understand, you know, we want it to be perfect, but we're going to have to make some tweaks. And we need to make tweaks after a reasonable time. BCT is suggesting 6 to 9 months, not after 1 or 2 months. It's not enough time to figure out what's going to be different. And so with regard to the second question, which is about pickup and drops off in Cowichan, as the staff report mentions, this is quite complex. You're dealing with union issues here. You're dealing with a union operator in one region coming into another. And so mainly for that reason, we unfortunately have to maintain what the MOU talks about, where it's a drop off only within Cowichan. And if a rider was to get on, let's say hypothetically in Ladysmith, and they're at the stop and they want to go to Duncan, the driver will say, unfortunately, this is an interregional service. You'll have to wait for the next conventional service, which is in 5 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever the time might be. We can't simply just say, come on and pay your $7.50 and carry on. However, that being said, we raised that issue with BC Transit, and they are willing to consider this and talk to the local operator to see if they would honor this, if you will. We have the same situation with our commuter service in Victoria. It's exactly the same. We do not pick up people in Victoria when the route is heading south. So I know it's not perfect, but this is the way that the service is set up at this point, and we're hoping that after a reasonable time, we'll do our due diligence. We'll check to see where the riders are getting on, where they want to get off, who our demographics are, because this may have changed from pre-COVID. We thought the majority of riders were going to be students going from Cowichan and Ladysmith up to Nanaimo. That may or may not be the case. So we have to sort of learn as we go and make some adjustments. The other part of this is, when we talk to our partner in the north, it might be that the best way to handle the connections is not to adjust the Nanaimo Cowichan Express, it's to adjust our local service. So maybe we have to make some tweaks to our conventional routes, which will line up better for residents to get to the main stops that we've identified on this service.
Thank you, Mr. Bickey.
Any other hands? I'm gonna bring up again what was brought up at the last meeting, just from a process perspective. Somebody gets on the bus in Duncan, northbound, and they get to the stop in Ladysmith and they want to get off. The bus driver is going to physically block them from getting off, and they're not going to ask everybody when they get on, where you going? I mean, and Jim, I fully understand the contractual stuff. I'm less concerned about it. I'm just looking at it from a practical perspective. It just, for most people, a bus is a bus. You know, folks get the express bus into downtown Victoria. That's been marketed as a, you know, as a commuter service, but Nanaimo, even sociologically in the minds of most people, is a different animal, and I'd be concerned as to how that would play out.
If I may just comment, Mr. Chair, I think what we need to do is improve our conventional service. It's kind of odd that somebody would pay $7.50 to go from Duncan to Ladysmith when they can take a conventional route for $2.25, but they might have to wait. I understand the times are different. I can't comment whether a driver is going to, what they're going to say. They're likely going to let them off, but they're going to say next time, please understand the service, and this is a drop off in Nanaimo only. But again, I think it would be odd that a resident would be willing to pay 3 times the price for a local service.
All right. Director Stone, to close.
And I just want to say that in the conversations that we've had, you know, and I even said during the last meeting and in conversations with Mr. Wakeham and other members of the transit team, that, you know, we've allocated a significant amount of local Ladysmith hours, which were admittedly probably over-serviced in the past, to the Ladysmith Couch and Express, the pilot project. And I think that, you know, in the conversations we had, I said, well, we would be willing to sort of put those hours back into the system to optimize the local routes to align with the Express, whether we get expansion or not, and just to make the whole system more efficient. And through that work, hopefully over the next year, you know, after we get some assessment of the success of this route, would be able to make some adjustments to address the issues in Chemainus and make it more feasible and reasonable in terms of timing. But you know, we can't predict the future. I'm just looking at past and speaking with some of the other directors that have seen improvements to the service over time, and I do have some confidence that this route will be successful and that we'll be able to look at expansion and reallocation of existing hours to serve some of the gaps. So that's just my perspective.
Thank you, Director Stone. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Looks like I'm the only one opposed. Fair enough. Thank you. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director.
Item R3 is the report from Inspection and Enforcement Division regarding fireworks discharge permits. And the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that CVRD fireworks bylaw number 39 be amended to allow for fireworks discharge permits for special events only, and to require that all fireworks discharge permits be approved by the board.
Discussion before I entertain the motion. I'll start with Director Smith, then Yana DiNardo. Director Smith.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to staff, is there a definition of what a special event would entail? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the special event is a defined term in the bylaw, but it is certainly something that could be refined. It currently is listed as that means the observance or celebration of a public special event, special or other ceremony sponsored or conducted by an organization or person.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Follow-up, Director Smith? No? Director Yana DiNardo.
Good morning. Thank you so much,
And
Mr.
then
Chair,
Wilson.
through you to Mr. McDonald. I just, I'm wondering why we don't have one option, and is it possible to ban fireworks altogether? What I'm looking at is it's almost impossible for enforcement, and we're such a big region. I just think that we are setting ourselves up for a whole bunch of work now. And really, we in the South, there has been communities in the South Ends, we've had WebEx or Zoom meetings with farmers. I was absolutely shocked. Some of the farmers even actually had to put their horses down because of this. So it's actually impossible to enforce. So we shouldn't be putting anything out there for our departments to be running around when it should just be banned. And that is something that we were moving towards anyway. I think that we need to ban it completely. And the challenge with this is that groups that are going to have fireworks can rearrange and do something different. Like, we just have to think differently. I've always been the one that has been opposed to fireworks. Everyone knows that. But as well, I think that we need to really consider what this means as even the special events. The one I know of is done in the spring. And yeah, I just think that we need to think differently about fireworks and do a different job and make it simpler on everybody by banning it completely. So I'm just wondering if we can't have that in the options.
Mr. McDonald, I mean, anything's an option. The board can make a motion, you know. So, Mr. McDonald, your thoughts?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what I was going to say. This was a difficult report to put together. It was originally put together as information only, but I did put a recommendation, but fully expecting that it may get changed or an alternate recommendation put forward. So staff is still open to what is put forward by directors.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait to hear from the rest of the committee.
Okay, I've got Director Wilson, Toporowski, Salmon, and Acton. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Director Yana Donato has made some very good points there, and I, if possible, would be in favour of banning this. But the problem is, of course, that it's going to happen anyway. It's the same as anything that can be done in the rural areas. And the most disturbing point, which again, Director Yana Donato has made, is to see some of the images of the animals which had to be put down. It's horrific. This is not the way that anything should end their life, purely because somebody wants to see a few lights and a few bangs. So really, it's just one of those things I would love to see gone. It's probably not going to happen. So one of the things that was said there by Mr. McDonald was the phrase organisation or person. So this means that even me, as an ordinary person, could come forward and say, it's my birthday, I'd like some fireworks, please. I'd like to see that changed if at all possible. And just to say to an organisation, a registered organisation, rather than, if we have to go down that route, take out the individual altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Toporowski, Salmon, Acton, and I've added Marsh to the list. Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was a spelling mistake. I'll start with that first. It was on attachment C, bylaw number 39, the last sentence on page 2. Should it read tickets instead of tick and fines?
A grammatical correction.
And also just wanted to add to that, I read there's 5 options that were available to us to view. And, I think back to my childhood of fireworks and how my aunt used to, have that opportunity to get us little sparkles and all those different things. It didn't make any noise. It made, like sparklies and some fun, I don't know, these weird worm things that, it was really, really cool little fireworks that we had as a kid. And my aunt used to try to do this at, New Year's. And it was fun. I do see the harmful effects. I personally had harmful effects from fireworks that I had gotten from some friends, and it blew up in my hand, and it hurts. It does. And you just don't know when you're a kid. You think they're fun. And yeah, so I just think about those different things of my personal experience with fireworks and the joy of seeing the lights and everything. But when you're young, you don't think about the harmful effects to animals or any other thing like that. When I moved in with my spouse now, his little dog, every time Halloween came, we had to lock and block every exit to our house because she would just go absolutely crazy, as in couldn't breathe. She would just absolutely go batty, and it was so hard to watch because I didn't know she was going to pass away. So those are real effects to animals that I had seen and witnessed. Again, there's 4 options. We've done some raising of public awareness for fireworks. I don't know if we've advocated to senior governments on, having the sales of illegal fireworks, but also I know they check for all sorts of things at the border. Some of these things come from other places. And there's options to amend the bylaw number 39 that we do have. I just trying to look at moving forward. I don't want to shut down special occasions. I know some families right now, due to the pandemic, are at home and wanting to have those family celebrations. But I must say, in my neighborhood, due to the pandemic, it seems quite quieter here. I don't know why, but our neighbors used to go crazy, but I guess maybe because they can't invite their friends over and have that public display in their front yard or backyard. I can't remember, but anyway, but I know it was really loud. Anyway, I just wanted to add those things. There's 5 different options. Maybe we should just, look at implementing them all and moving forward on looking at those, going out to a full-out ban. But I don't know. That's just something that we need to hear from the public as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Toporowski. Acton, Marsh, Nicholson, and then I'm going to loop back to Director Smith. Oh.
Excuse me, I think Director Sebring, you had me on the list too.
Oh, yes, I did. Thank you. Oh, Director Salmon, you're next. I'm sorry, I overlooked you. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Director Staples has her hand up too.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I'm echoing the other directors. I think the way the society is going in general is banning fireworks. I know we had the community meeting here on this, and it was quite horrific. Some of the stories, the effects on livestock and pets and even birds. So yeah, I think we can show leadership on this. I mean, I just want another point I'd like to make is there are lots of alternatives now with spectacular stuff, spectacular light shows, laser shows. There was one I noticed online that had drones with lasers doing stuff. So I think especially for the organized events, they can start to move that way and show some leadership. And, we won't be able to right away ban all, have no fireworks because people will do it anyway. But I think it's important to show leadership. So, and I do notice outright prohibition is mentioned there in option 3. So I don't know if we're ready for a motion yet, but I was going to suggest that, I'd like to try this. I'd like to recommend to the board that the CVRD fireworks bylaw number 39 be amended to remove section 4, which is the requirement for special events section. So if I can get a seconder for that, I would speak to that.
So just for clarity, before we get a seconder, if we remove section 4 and the rest of the bylaw stands, is that in effect a ban because section 4 is the only section that under which it's allowed? I haven't fully read into the existing bylaw. Is that your intent, Director Salmon?
Yeah, and maybe Mr. McDonald could confirm that.
Mr. McDonald, if we remove section 4, is that an effectual ban of all fireworks?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, section 3 is prohibitions, and it says except as permitted by section 4. So in essence, if you removed section 4, you would have to alter section 3 as well, but that would in essence be an outright ban.
Okay. Can I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Ms. Girolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to recommend that if the intent of the committee is to request that the board amend the bylaw to ban fireworks, that the resolution simply reflect that intent as opposed to recommending specific alterations to the bylaw, because we may need to make other changes to the bylaw that wouldn't be reflected by just removing section 4.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Director Morrison.
So I patiently waited in the hopes that we would all have an opportunity to share on the staff report. Are we now limited to discussion on just the resolution on the floor, or will we be granted the latitude that the early speakers on this item were given?
You know, that's a good question. I was about to make a separate speakers list on the resolution, but given the fact that not everyone has had a chance to speak generally, I think I'm going to allow some leeway, and I'm just going to continue with the speakers list that I had set up before, just because not everybody has weighed in. But that means it cuts off. I've got directors Acton, Marsh, Nicholson, Morrison, Staples, Kuhn, and myself who haven't spoken on this yet. So I'm going to, and I don't know if Director McGonigal wants to speak. Oh, he does. Okay, I'll put him on the list as well. So we'll continue, but try to contextualize as well as you comment on the general staff report. Try to contextualize a little bit where you sit with. I see you, Director Martman, where you sit with the motion that's before us, so we don't have to go through it all again. So with that, I'll go to Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be really brief. I would support all the comments that have been made so far, leaning towards showing some leadership as was discussed. And I think there'll be a percentage of people who won't be in favor, and that percentage, I think, really reflects the unwillingness to change. And this is something that is moving towards that. Vancouver's taken the huge leap and has already banned fireworks, and it's the time has come for us to move in that direction. And if this was any other topic that was damaging to wildlife or tradition or people's habits, we wouldn't think twice about it. So I don't know that holding on to something like this is really worthwhile. And I would support anything that moves us towards not allowing it. And it totally reflects how times are going. And if anything, the pandemic has showed us we need to rethink things, and we can make some real positive change and learn to, for a better future for everyone. So it may not be totally popular with every group, but I think I really respect that it's heading, that everyone's comments towards that, and I would be supporting that direction as well.
Thank you, Director Acton. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I want to thank Chair Yanni DiNardo for her persistence over the years. And I'll just add one thing that I learned from former Chair Hutchins. He reminded us once at an Arcowichan meeting, it took 10 years after seatbelt legislation for people to actually consistently wear seatbelts. So you have to start somewhere. Let's start today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I am supportive of it. It's certainly an issue in rural areas that we need to pay attention to.
Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is obviously an important issue to a lot of people. As a dog owner, you know, I hear from all of the pet owners about the trauma that you know, their pets experience, and don't have a lot of farming in my area, so don't experience the issues that people have with livestock and the likes, but certainly understand what the issues are. I'm going to look at this from a little bit more of a practical perspective, and understanding that I'm supportive that we're not causing trauma to animals and people alike in our areas, but I also think about the practicality of a ban and the impact that'll have. Every year I discuss with staff the number of permits that are pulled in my electoral area, and it's few to none. Doesn't reflect the number of fireworks that seem to be set off each year. So, you know, with a couple of questions to staff as to clarity around how this would work. Firstly, have we had discussions with the sellers? There's obviously money to be made, and every year they crop up. It seems like the hours are getting longer. I would also ask, what about the enforcement of a ban? Because the difficulty that we have now, even with the police, even if we make this a municipal ticket infraction, what effect is it going to have when they show up, the fireworks have been set off, and everybody scatters? Are we going to have another bylaw that shows leadership, but in practice is unenforceable? So I pose those questions to staff because it looks like they're having a tough time as it is, and if we take this leadership step, is the likelihood we're going to have a whole bunch of illegal, as they are already, fireworks displays going on, and police and bylaw folks out trying to track them down.
Mr. McDonald.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As Director Morrison states, yes, it is a very difficult bylaw to enforce. So that's the difficulty in putting in an outright ban. But we're currently experiencing anyway, because there's a lot of times prior to the designated dates, generally a week before, especially on Halloween, this is already happening.
Quick follow-up. Do we have MTI fine? Is it on the books? And what are the fines? Because I'm going to suggest that we may need to increase fines and have the police be able to hand out those tickets. Could you inform us as to what they are?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the fine for discharge is $250, and the fine for sales is $750.
But the reality is the sales don't happen in our jurisdiction. So, all right. I see Director Yanadinardo's popped up again. Director Yanadinardo, you've spoken already. I'm finishing up the list of folks who haven't spoken, and then it's my intent to turn the discussion exclusively onto the motion that's before us. I've got Director Staples next, then McGonigal and Markman. Go ahead, Director Staples.
Thank you. I think part of my question is being answered around the enforcement piece, and even recognizing, you know, that building something around that is going to take time, and it takes time, as Councillor or Director Marsh spoke about, when people do make changes, but they do come eventually. And I think with the, you know, as Director Salmon mentioned, all the changes that there are to technology now, there are more and more of these shows being done in different ways, and there's other options available. So I really believe we should take this leadership step and, you know, continue to promote events that use alternative technologies to doing this, and do the education work and look at ways that this can be enforced. And I know I think that's the hardest part for me, because I'm just not sure how the regional district would be able to manage any of that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do what's right to start to change the trajectory of this. So I'm not sure that I support the motion that's on the floor, just based on what staff was saying, that perhaps it's better for us to send this back to staff with a recommendation that for the firework ban rather than being specific. So that's what I'd like to say now. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a draft amendment that I've put together in my back pocket here that we'll get to when we get back to the motion. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I certainly understand the angst of livestock owners and animal owners alike, not only during Halloween, but various times throughout the year when this is impacted to their animals and pets. I too am concerned on the sale, which is not within our jurisdiction, and how the banning of that is going to impact the sale of those fireworks. Until there is some support from senior levels of government on the banning of fireworks, period, I think we are looking at a dead end of chasing illegal fireworks with no means of recuperation. And I certainly understand the need for some leadership. Whether this is the answer of total banning, I'm not sure at this time.
Thank you. Director Markman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. So my perspective comes from a rural agricultural area. I am a farmer, so I do have Hereford cows. I have a horse. I run a dog kennel, so we often populate the kennel because people in the urban areas need to move their dogs out because of fireworks, and they're always concerned about the amount of fireworks that the dogs might be exposed to out here. And our neighbor has 30 cows. Other neighbors have horses. So, we're right smack in the middle of this. And I remember speaking to my neighbor about fireworks. Particularly, we have a corn maze very nearby, within, maybe within a kilometer, that has fireworks. And her comment was, you can plan for it as a farmer. You can plan, and if it's the one day and the time period, you can manage that. And and as a kennel operator too, we can. We take precautions and able to do things that will help mitigate it. And that's coming from a rural area. So travel sounds, or travel, goes a long way sometimes depending on the geography, and other times it might be across the other side of the mountain. You don't hear it very well. So, having a set parameter of 500 meters or a kilometer may or may not work depending on where you are. I'm also very concerned about having a bylaw. Yes, we would show leadership, but having something you can't enforce. And I particularly had one resident that lives in the Diamond that had to put a horse down. And that was because of fireworks occurring ad hoc, in the week lead up to Halloween, and just unpredictable. Didn't know when it's going to happen. Couldn't take precautions with her horse, and I think the one thing that she mentioned to me was about if we could do everybody within the 500 meters would get a flyer saying you're within 500 meters of a farm, you're within this distance. It is total ban. There is no fireworks permitted, period, anytime. And then you would, she said, the special events can occur. It's just those people need to be aware. And so I started looking at the map and realizing that if you put a 500-meter circle around all the farms in all our area, that pretty much makes us Area H, an exclusion area for any kind of fireworks. And so I'm not sure if you do that throughout the CVRD, but I guess my point being is that it isn't necessarily all or nothing from a farmer perspective, but it really does need to be contained. And if you can't contain it, and I think that's what I'm hearing from Mr. McDonald, then you really are stuck to trying to educate the neighbors about the impact of what they're doing. And if that's a flyer saying, hey, you're within 500 meters, it's zero tolerance. We're not allowing any of this. And if we have to go to some steps to enforce that, we will try to do that. But I just have a very difficult time at saying we're going from having some special events to none. So where I fit with this motion is I think we are headed there, as Director Leonardo has mentioned. We will get there. Will be total ban, but perhaps we can do it in a prescribed method that we would say we are moving there. We are going to, over the next 2-3 years, make this towards total ban, and this is how we're going to do it. And it may be starting with education and promoting to the provincial government. It may be doing a number of steps in terms of eliminating anything but special events. But eventually, we will say, in 3 years from now, we are going to be firework free zone throughout the whole CVRD. Anyways, thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Martman. I see Director Stone is, I think, the only one who hasn't weighed in yet. Do you have anything you got to add here, Director Stone, before I put
You had
myself
me
on
on
the
your
list?
list too,
Oh,
Mr.
Director
Chairman.
Kuhn, I'm sorry. I did have you there. And because I had you there, I'm going to go to you first, and then Director Stone, and then me to close on this part.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I side with Dr. Martman on this issue. And I wonder, I guess it would be too complicated or impractical to leave it up to each area. But I guess it would just make it too. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out. I have no other solution. I'm neither here nor there. I can see the validity of maybe banning fireworks. On the other hand, we have fireworks in Yubo at New Year and Thanksgiving, and it draws the kids and everybody's having fun. So I really don't know. I would be in favor of maybe selecting certain areas and say, okay, there are a lot of animals there. Maybe we shouldn't have fireworks. But I don't know how it would be practically enforced. So anyway, I'm neither here nor there.
Thank you, Director Kuhn. Director Stone. I see you, Director Marsh.
Yeah, I appreciate Director Martman's comments and really can't add to them other than recognizing the practicality and the operational limitations of bylaw enforcement staff and where the fireworks are being sold sort of in nodes throughout the CVRD, but in areas that we do not have jurisdiction over. So the discharge of fireworks within those areas are not under our purview, and those would have similar impacts. For example, this past year, there was a number of fireworks not within our jurisdiction that were easy to hear, see, and enjoy from my property, but was not within CVRD jurisdiction, so there would be no enforcement there. So, it's funny because it was Director Sebring at the first AVICC that said, as you get into this, kid, realize that the law, look at the unintended consequences of any kind of decisions that you make. And so I'm forced to look at the unintended consequences and the practicality of an outright ban. I like Director Martman's prescription of communication, engagement, leading to a broader enforcement, and perhaps a year or two down that road of engaging with communities and explaining the real harms that are done to both livestock, wildlife, and people that are affected for other reasons, that perhaps a ban wouldn't even be necessary or would just be a final step in sort of solidifying what the communities have already taken on as their own understandings, priorities, and support. So I just have a lot of questions about the enforceability. If out in my area of Area G in the Diamond, we hear a bunch of fireworks going off, we call out bylaw enforcement staff, and then they go chase their tails for a while and then realize it's not even within their jurisdiction. And really, the best way to eliminate it would be to eliminate sales. Of course, that's not something we can do on our own, but perhaps engagement with our neighboring communities to talk about that, the importance of the impacts of fireworks on wildlife, and transition for communities to recognize that and adopt new ways of celebrating special events or dates within communities that isn't sort of seen as a heavy-handed no fun zone from the regional government might be a better approach. So I would support Director Martman's perspective in that we start with some education and move towards an outright ban sometime down the road.
Thank you, Director Stone. I have not spoken to this yet, so I'm going to take the liberty of doing that. I really share what we heard from both Director Martman and Director Morrison. You know, we can jump up and down and do all the bans we want, but as long as this product is still legal and available and readily available in neighboring jurisdictions, and let's be open about that. These things are sold on First Nations reserves, and they're making money on it, and right now they're entitled to that. Until we deal with that particular part of the equation, we can do all the bans in the world we want. It's not going to happen because some folks are just going to want to buy their fireworks for their kid's birthday or for Halloween or for whatever it is and set it off, and they're not going to come to us for a permit. And as Director Morrison said, you know, by the time bylaw enforcement gets a call, you know, the fireworks are discharged, the crowd's dispersed. How do you lay charges? It's very, very difficult to do. So that's to me, the challenge. I see you, Director Yanadinardo, you're on my list. So to me, it's a practical piece. And you know, I note, for example, in the staff report that under option 3, you know, identifying specific locations in the region where fireworks discharge is acceptable and increasing the minimum distance of livestock or active farms. That's kind of the approach we've taken a little bit within North Cowichan, as we've written some stuff into the bylaw with respect to proximity to farms and notification and those kinds of things. And again, that, you know, it's not going to solve everything because some people are just going to ignore that. I recognize we can't not write bylaws on the premise that people are going to ignore them anyway. But the corollary to that is we shouldn't write bylaws that we can't enforce. And I'm really not sure where I fall on that spectrum, but I just don't think the outright ban would work. And to me, fundamentally, that's what it's about. I'm going to move back into the discussion on the motion that's before us, but before I do, I'm going to propose an amendment, and I don't know whether Director Salmon will be happy with this, but based on the advice from Ms. Chirolf, I think the motion should probably, and it's the same motion, but it involves a little bit of different work for staff. The motion should probably be replaced with that the committee recommend to the board that staff be directed to draft a bylaw prohibiting the discharge of fireworks in electoral areas of the CBRD. Then we come up with a fresh piece. I don't know, Director Salmon, does that also capture your intent?
I think so.
I'm sorry?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So can I have a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Director Salmon.
Point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
This is a regional bylaw. Does this not apply to all regions within the regional district?
CBRD can't control this stuff within our municipalities. I believe we have our own. That's why I put in the electoral areas. I could be wrong on that. I would turn to our corporate officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bylaw applies to the town of Lake Cowichan, the town of Ladysmith electoral area, and all of the 9 electoral areas.
So it doesn't apply to the city of Duncan and North Cowichan?
The city of Duncan and North Cowichan have their own bylaw.
Okay, that's the clarification then. So then there would be electoral areas and the 3 municipalities that were just mentioned. So I have a seconder for that. Thank you for the clarification, Director Morrison. Appreciate that. Can
Mr. Chair, further clarification, if I could, please.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I did hear you mention that you were about to stop any kind of discussion after you had spoken finally, but I see you've started another list, so I did stop waving my arms frantically because of that statement. But I have things to say as well if you're starting up another.
Well, the next round, just for the process, the next round will be on the motion that's before us rather than the general staff report, which is what we've wrapped up. And I'm just trying to...
Am I on the list?
Yes, you are now. And I'm just trying to provide some clarity on the motion before us. That's why I proposed the amendment, just to make it crystal clear what it is we're trying to do here. And I have that amendment moved and seconded, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment.
Excuse me, can we please have the it reread for clarification,
Okay.
as there was an amendment to the amendment.
Yep. That the committee recommend to the board that staff be directed to draft a bylaw prohibiting the discharge of fireworks in electoral areas of the CVRD, as well as the town of Lake Cowichan, town of Ladysmith, and where else? And that's it. The town of Lake Cowichan and Ladysmith. So that's the amendment that's before us. Okay, on the amendment, I'll start a list on the amendment if that's what this is about. Nice dog, Director Marsh.
I wish I could say the same about her breath.
Okay, who do I have? I had Wilson and Staples on the amendment. Was it Wilson? No, it was Director Kuhn and Staples on the amendment. Director Kuhn, on the amendment?
Yeah, I don't quite get it. I mean, so now the amendment says that a bylaw be prepared for the mentioned electoral areas to prohibit. I thought we were not going to do that. This is contrary to, for instance, what Director Martman suggested, and you backed it up, and I backed it up, and now we're coming with a prohibit. I don't get it.
To be clear, Director Kuhn, I don't think I'm going to vote in favor of this. I've just amended. There was a motion on the table that we remove Section 4 of the bylaw, which essentially would have banned all fireworks. And Ms. Cherolf came to us and said, well, if that's what you want to do, be explicit and have us write that bylaw rather than amend what's there. So that's all that this amendment does. So there you go. Director Staples and Morrison on the amendment.
So a couple of things, and I'm not sure if this can just be direction around the amendment, but looking or listening to what has been said, setting an end date, I think, is really important. So if it is something that the board wants to entertain in terms of having a time frame where, this is phased out over the next 6 months, year, education is done, that be part of the staff report that's coming back to us around the bylaw and suggestions to the bylaw, because I'm not against that we're phasing out. Now I see two things with that. One is that it could cause people to go out and go crazier in terms of purchasing and so I just think it's around how we frame this is really important. So I'm just not sure about that, because the enforcement piece does have to be worked out. Without that, we can have the bylaw, but really at the end of the day, if it's not being enforced, that does have its challenges. So I'd like to see a process with an end date, an educational process, and then also a referral to both the City of Duncan and the municipality of North Cowichan to adopt the bylaw that is created, so that we're doing this as a region, because that also doesn't make sense. And also to First Nations communities within the region as well, around the bylaw, why we're doing it, asking about prohibiting sales, and also adopting the same type of bylaw on First Nations lands. We've done that with other things before, and so
Director Staples,
Director
Staples, I'm going to call you to order here. We're talking about the amendment from.
I understand that, Director Sebring, and so I'm also speaking to the amendment, because I feel that the amendment, if we're going to speak to this amendment about banning it, I'm speaking about direction to the staff report to come back to us around banning fireworks. So I believe that I am in order in speaking to this the way that I am. And so that's what I would like to see. And also a referral to the province and the regulators around fireworks. So those are the things that I'd like to see happen in a ban around fireworks in the regional district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Morrison, to the amendment.
Thank you, and I have some similar concerns. I believe the amendment, as it was read out, was to draft a bylaw. I really want to see a staff report come back because, again, unintended consequences of outright ban. Are we going to increase the fines under the MTI? Are we going to drive folks that are buying fireworks into unsafe areas where they'll be setting them off illegally against the ban and causing issues around dry forests and the like? So I'd really like to see a staff report accompany a bylaw that would give staff opportunity to explain what the new reality would look like if we were in a position where everything was banned. Thank you.
All right. Director Marsh on the amendment.
Yeah, I don't, or if the amendment passes, then do we get to speak to the motion as amended? Because
Yes,
it's been a bit confusing procedurally this morning, Mr. Chair.
Yes, we definitely get to speak to the motion.
I'll wait until then.
All right. I'm not seeing, Director Smith, you had your hand up. Yes, go ahead.
And Mr. Chair, you're not forgetting me, I hope.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this conversation. It's definitely a complicated one depending on where you live and how things have gone in the past. But when you start to look at the enforcement, all of a sudden we have Duncan that isn't included in this, and we have North Cowichan that's not included in this. Lake Cowichan has somehow got its own bylaw and is included in two bylaws, this one and their own. So we have some things, and I can definitely see that the town of Ladysmith would probably consider pulling out of this bylaw so that they could have their own. I can't speak for that, but so all of a sudden we're going to have it boiled down to just the electoral areas that are going to have a ban, and then we're going to have all the other jurisdictions having fireworks somehow. So we need to all coordinate together on what we're going to do. It's not going to be 2 kilometers down the road from Saltaire, the Chemainus people are lighting off fireworks. People just down the other road are lighting them off in Ladysmith, and we're stuck in the middle with nothing. So I think that we need to really have a good look at this as not just a bylaw, and whether we pull back in Duncan and make it so that it includes the whole regional area. That would put it under one umbrella, and maybe that's something we should consider. And I know that I wanted to speak a tiny bit earlier, and you can call me on point of order on this, but
No, I will, because you are first on the list for general discussion on the motion once we get past this amendment. So I would ask you to hold your comments until we get there, if we pass this amendment, and we may not. I don't know.
Yeah, so I don't feel that this amendment is going to cover the whole regional area, and that we need to make sure that we include everyone and one size fits all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Wilson, then Salmon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been in this situation before many, many times on very, very important points where we've got amendments to amendments to amendments. And in the end, we are all totally confused, as I am right now, of what is actually being said and what is being discussed. And this is a situation that I do not like. I appreciate that amendments are necessary at times, and they are very, very useful. But they can lead to a huge amount of why did I do that? I didn't mean to do that, etc. And this is the situation I find myself in right now. One thing I'm going to say is that any law, any bylaw, any Supreme Court law is unenforceable. We cannot therefore step back and say we can't make this bylaw because it's unenforceable. If countries and governments can do it, we certainly can as well. Thank you.
Just for clarity again, Director Wilson, this amendment just seeks to clarify and laser focus the motion that was originally on the table. And that motion was to remove Clause 4, which would have an effect of banning fireworks. And
yeah, I understand that, Mr. Chair, but
and staff said to us, If you want to ban fireworks, tell us to write a bylaw banning fireworks, and that's all this does. So it
Okay,
doesn't
thank you
change,
very much.
doesn't change the intent. Thank you, Director Salmon.
Okay, thank you. So I don't think I will support this. I'll tell you why. I think our conversation's gotten a little off track and more complicated. So just to be clear, I keep hearing the word ban. We're going to ban fireworks. Fireworks are already banned. Section 3 is very clear. No person shall discharge or facilitate the discharge of fireworks. So it's already there. All the enforcement things and it's already banned. It's already a big problem. I'm just talking about the permitted ones is what I was hoping we would not allow anymore. So that was section 4. So I just envision more a simple thing that would encourage the people that previously got a permit, the leaders to continue and go into the alternatives and look into that. Not going to change anything about the banning fireworks thing that we already have. So I still prefer to just keep it simple and.
Okay. Even though you seconded the amendment, fair enough.
Yeah, that's right. Reverse myself.
Director Stone.
Sorry, I'll speak to the motion once we get through the amendment, if you can put me on that list.
I'm going to call the question on the amendment. I think we've beat this up long enough. All in favor of the amendment to simplify? All right. And opposed? Please keep your hands up so Ms. Our corporate officer can track. All right. Is that, I believe that's, the amendment passes? Okay, the amendment passes. So now to debate on the motion as amended, and I'll start with Director Smith on my list.
Mr. Chair, could you read it again, please?
Yes, please read it again.
So the motion as amended would be that it be recommended to the board that bylaw 39 be amended to prohibit the discharge of fireworks in the electoral areas and within the town of Lake Cowichan and town of Ladysmith.
Okay, that's the amendment.
Thank you. I struggle with this amendment based on my earlier points when I spoke to the amendment was the exclusion of North Cowichan and their fireworks and Duncan, their fireworks, and that the town of Ladysmith or the town of Lake Cowichan has a different bylaw, and yet they're included in this bylaw. The application to the areas definitely pinpoints the electoral areas. And as I said, one size should fit all when it comes to, we're sitting in a regional meeting and we should look at it realistically as a whole region. One of the things that I meant to say earlier, and it's not just animals, we're looking at chemicals that are being released into the atmosphere, and that some of those chemicals are dangerous to humans and to animals. And when the animals eat the grass, there's now chemicals in the grass, or I think there's also chemicals that impact the wildlife and the birds. So there is other detrimental parts of fireworks. And Saltaire has had a fireworks for the Halloween event almost every year, but due to COVID and a few changes, the last 2 years we haven't held it. All of a sudden, we went from gathering 200 people together for a fireworks event, and it was well attended, and we didn't have fireworks going off at all sorts of crazy times. That really worked. And now, because of COVID, we have people lighting off fireworks all over the place and all over the time. I have explored the other options. The new technology that is out there is extremely expensive. Drones are not something we take lightly in the cost. And there is other possibilities of light shows, and I continue to explore those. I think that we need to go down the avenue of technology. And here we sit with technology as we all gather for this meeting. So I think that if we're able to gather through technology for meetings, we should be able to explore some other options. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. I have Yana DiNardo, Acton, Marsh, and Staples on my list so far on the motion as amended, and I'm adding Director Stone. Yana DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think staff has heard the discussion here, and this motion would be fine when we get the report that comes back, because I think we're continuing the same conversation round and round. But I have to say, historically, when Cowichan tribes came to CVRD to ask if we could ban the fireworks, we had quiet around the south end, at least, for at least 3 or 4 years. So it worked well. So I think that and I'll go back to the leadership. I think that this is a good thing to do, and I will be voting for this motion, and staff has heard us, and I think they'll come back with a substantial report that would reflect what we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yana DiNardo. Director Acton.
Thank you. I echo the same support. I'd just like to point out, though, the comments about people not following the bylaw now or not getting the permit. It's because it's ambiguous, and if the general public knows that there's just an all-out ban, people want to follow the rules, and I think we will see way less fireworks. And on the rare occasion when it does happen, it will be a lot easier to enforce than it is at the moment with, all they had to do was get a permit. So we're gonna be fine with that as we are now. So we're actually not even enforcing the bylaw even more than we would if we had an actual stance of no tolerance for fireworks. So I'll support that direction. And thanks for the discussion.
Thank you, Director Acton. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I also support it, and I understand that some people are concerned about the inability to enforce the bylaw. We have that challenge in North Cowichan on burning, and what we tell people is take a photo and send it in. And so I'll just give you a short anecdote. Before, when we had a ban, we have only special days now in North Cowichan, and somebody in my neighborhood was setting off fireworks, and I was driving home and I was about to stop and tell them that they couldn't, and there was a neighbor already there telling them. So I think that there is a critical mass of people who feel the way a lot of people feel about their own dogs or about farm animals, and I just think that taking the leadership role now, within a few years, we won't have fireworks, and I will make a commitment to make a notice of motion to North Cowichan if this passes, and even if it doesn't, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Director Staples.
Yeah, I would echo what is being said and trust that staff will come back with the bylaw and also with a report based on the input that has been shared around this table and has been repeated a number of times. So I will not add another repeat of it and just appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Director Staples. Nicholson. Oh, Director Stone, then Nicholson. I'm sorry.
Well, either way is fine with me.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
So, Director Salmon pointed it out, looking at the bylaw, essentially fireworks are already banned outside of dates and permits. However, for the week before and the week after, things like Halloween, the fireworks are going off. I don't believe that the folks that we're concerned about have secured permits in the past, nor will they in the future. And I just think that it's foolhardy to rush ahead with a bylaw that is essentially unenforceable, create an expectation that you can't deliver on, and then deal with the backlash when you can't deliver on those expectations that have been set. And again, until you get full regional participation, and that means areas outside of our jurisdiction, whether it's a municipality or a First Nation, you're just spinning your wheels. So I think we need to do some engagement, bring the whole of the region to the table and get that agreement to ban sales and discharge of fireworks, and then have that conversation. On the side note about alternatives, last year the FAA reported a crisis level of Christmas laser lights causing interference with aircraft. Over 8,500 incidents reported in 2021, up 25% from 2020, which was a record year before that. Over the last 10 years, it's gone from about 1,000 reports a year to over 8,000 reports a year, just because of people's little star laser lights that they cast onto their homes. So I just want to be wary and mindful of the alternatives that are out there are not easily deployed. Laser light shows in our area, for example, would not be allowed because of the interference with the airport, nor would some of the alternatives be accepted because like drones flying in flight paths, et cetera. So, you know, I'm very much around community celebrations on key dates. I don't think is the crisis or the concern, and I appreciate that's what kind of staff brought forward was special events only, you know, organizations only, key dates only. I could support that. I just don't think it's realistic to move forward with a ban without bringing everyone together around the ban, and meaning all the nations, all the municipalities. If that were to happen, I could support it, but I won't be supporting this motion at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Stone. I see Mr. McDonald has popped up. Did you want to say? No? Okay. Then Nicholson and then Staples. Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this has been an interesting conversation because I wasn't really paying attention to the fact that North Cowichan and Duncan weren't a part of this bylaw. So I am ultimately think we need to move in the way of banning fireworks. But I think the timing, I'm just questioning the timing of this. And I'm wondering, I completely agree with Director Staples on the staff report that's required. But I think that it's more than just a staff report. We really need to have some consultation and assurance from North Cowichan and Duncan and the First Nations that they agree that we need to move in this direction before we move ahead with the bylaw. So I'm wondering if it would be better to maybe compromise at this point, get the process moving on the consultation and community education, and in the meantime, just limit it to special events for public purposes, and then move towards an outright ban. It might be a more practical solution at this point. I'd kind of like staff to comment on that.
Mr. McDonald.
To you, Mr. Chair. So staff is looking for direction. That's a very controversial subject. The main recommendation, or recommendation number one, is I think where Director Nicholson is going, and that's why I had recommended just doing the special event, because these special event ones, actually each one is looking for approval by the board. So everyone would come forward, so you would have the opportunity to approve or deny them. So in essence, if you denied all of them, there would be a ban that way. So just with some, I guess, extra leeway in that direction. So I hope that answers Director Nicholson's question.
Director Nicholson, I think procedurally you want to then defeat what's before us now and then move option one out of the staff report to get to where you want to go. Go ahead. Go ahead, Director Nicholson.
I'd like to follow up because staff didn't really answer my question. I think what's needed is a process to consult with the other jurisdictions and to educate the public about the direction that we intend to go. And then as an interim measure, limit it to the public events with a time frame attached to it. I'm wondering if that makes more sense to staff from managing the process versus moving ahead with drafting a new bylaw to completely ban it now and not have, yeah.
Mr. McDonald.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Director Nicholson, staff is looking for direction, so that is possible if directors give staff direction to pursue that.
But the question was, would it make sense to do it that way? I see Ms. Girolf has popped up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have prepared budgets for 2022. If the committee or eventually the board would be looking for us to undertake a public consultation process in regards to potential amendments to this bylaw, we would be looking to bring you supplemental budget requests to cover the costs of doing that work, because we would be looking to contract with a consultant to do that engagement on the CVRD's behalf.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, anything else? No. Director Staples.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that what I was referring to earlier was around there being the bylaw with a staff report. When I look through what's being proposed, there's sort of three or four options that I feel could be sort of blended together. So how, as we move through this discussion, I would prefer to see a staff report come back with a process that we could then adopt, but with an end date as well for banning all fireworks. So not just a new bylaw, but there's a process to develop that new bylaw in partnership with other jurisdictions and First Nations. And so I'm not talking about a public process. I'm talking about a process to get on the same page in terms of creating the intent of the bylaw and letting people know that we're going to be doing this. And, even if, and have a short date. I don't think this needs to be something that is, the process itself could take a long time, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to have a date to have the bylaw established. But the process should also be in place at the same time. So I guess I had a question similar to Director Nicholson that I'm not sure has been answered, is because I also heard from staff right now that it sounded like a much more complex process that they were talking about in terms of hiring someone to do work that I think is a lot broader than what we've been talking about here in terms of public consultation. But to bring all the community members together to have a discussion about what this might look like, community partners and local governments and First Nations, I think that that's a really good place to start. But also to come back with something that does say by this date, a bylaw by this date, this is going to happen, but this is the process that we're going to have happening parallel to that. So I would still support this motion, but with that intention that staff report come back with looking at ways that process can take place as well.
Okay, thank you. There is a distinction between public consultation and sitting down with our jurisdictional neighbors, being the municipalities and the First Nations.
Yeah, I'm only talking jurisdictional neighbors at this point, not yet.
Thank you. I saw Director Martman had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And I guess, the discussion's really interesting, and I think, we're not that far apart. I think it's really a matter of timing, as other directors have mentioned. And how do we get there, and how long does it have to be, and whether it's 6 months or 12 months or longer. But the people that I talk to want to see a change occur, and making a change on paper doesn't make a difference for them out in the street or out in their farm or out walking their dog. Really it's just a paper change for them. And I think having a process that puts something in place that gets the whole region together, gets a commonality to it, addresses the concerns that you hear around the impact to the environment, impact to animals, letting people know that this change is coming because it's very important, and getting that educational piece out there so that we all start, as someone suggested, wearing our seatbelts together, not because it's required by enforcement, because we learn it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Martman. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I actually, after this really interesting conversation, I think that we would be smart to defeat this, do option 1 in the staff report, and then when people come to us, say no. And regards to the seatbelt comment, I was the one who said it, And it is a lot. It became instituted by the people. It wasn't bylaws. The police couldn't reinforce it. It was like, I got to where, okay, you're riding in my car, you need a seatbelt on, which wasn't easy with teenagers. So I think that staff had a good idea. And because it's just starting to get so convoluted to me that I don't really know what I'd be voting on to support this, because there's been several different things that people want to see in a staff report. And I think, honestly, this is truly an important thing. And I think we have a lot of other really important things, and we're short on staff time. So I think we should just give option one a try. And over time, I believe, especially if our neighbors join us, we will have a ban on fireworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Any further discussion before I call the question? On the motion as amended, all in favor? And opposed? Please keep your hands up if you're opposed, so Ms. Corporate Director can see who voted against. I believe the motion is defeated.
Mr. Chair, if I may, could I move option one in the staff report?
Sure.
So I'd like to move option one in the staff report, which, as Mr. McDonald said, gives us, I'll wait till the seconder, sorry.
You have a seconder. Go ahead, Councillor Marsh.
Okay, which, as Mr. McDonald reminded us, every special occasion is going to come before the board. And in the meantime, we can network with our neighbors, et cetera. And I just think it's going to be more expedient. So I hope you'll support that.
Thank you very much. It's moved and seconded. I just want to comment on one thing that was said in debate earlier as well. They can come to us and then we'll just turn them down. We need to be careful with that. On all issues that come before the board, we need to keep an open mind. And to just prejudge and say we're going to do that, I don't think is appropriate.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm really sorry. I missed the question and I missed voting on it. I'm homesick myself and a child homesick. So I'm sorry I had to turn my video off for a second.
Okay. For the record, would you have voted in favor or against?
I was in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. I saw some hands go up, but I'm not sure. Director Staples. Okay, Director, yeah.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Well, so for the record, we have Director acting on. Do we count her vote? Because I think it was close.
No, we don't.
It was.
Yeah, I don't believe it was that close. Was it?
There were sufficient directors opposed to defeat the motion.
Yeah.
Sorry, there were how many? Sorry, I didn't hear the answer there.
The answer was there were sufficient directors opposed to defeat the motion. It was a majority of the board.
Okay, well, thank you, and I apologize, but you know what it's like now with COVID and being at home. Sorry.
Totally get it. Thank you. Director Staples, then Smith.
So I guess the trouble with option one for me is that it doesn't describe what we've been talking about in terms of a process at all, or in terms of providing an end date. So I can't support this motion. I would like to see, and again, I at this point, I'd actually kind of like staff to take what they've heard today and come back to us, because I think we can go back and forth and do this a million times. But I think there's some of the options need to be combined. With the direction for an end date, and also with the direction for a process with our neighboring jurisdictions. So I would actually, at this point, I will not support this motion, and I would like to refer back to staff to take what they've heard today and bring something back to us that we can actually vote on without spending more hours through this.
So that's a motion to refer, which I saw seconded by, I think, Director Yanni DiNardo. On the propriety of referral, anybody want to speak to that, or are we okay to let staff come back? Okay, Director Smith. On the propriety of referral.
Yes, on the propriety of referral, I think that staff was looking for more direction than just referral back to staff. I think it needs to be clear that we're looking for discussions with other jurisdictions within the Cowichan Valley. Would that be included in this referral? Or do we need to make sure that that's included for the direction to staff?
Mr. McDonald, you've heard the discussion. If we refer it back to you, will you consider that to be marching orders to do the consultation with neighboring jurisdictions and take in some of the other issues that have been brought up here, including potentially increased fines and all the rest of it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I think staff is clear to this degree. As also Mr. Rolfe had said, though, to go beyond that, there's no budget to go too far beyond this, so it would be limited.
Okay, thank you. So, Director Smith, that is inferred. Director Toporowski, I had your hand up earlier, but I'm not sure if that was on the referral motion or just generally. You're good?
Good. Thank you, Chair. Good question. Yeah, I'm just reading my notes. Yeah, so now that this motion's on the floor for the referral, I'll be supporting that. I just wanted to go back to when I mentioned the options and, you know, option 4, 5, and 3, and all of those, bringing them together. Director Martman eloquently put them all together, and his idea of all of that made sense, and he made it more clear in that process. And I do think it would be good to have that discussion with our neighboring First Nations, because, you know, from what I've seen on Facebook, when Halloween comes, you know, those special occasions like Halloween and New Year's Eve, fireworks are going off in our jurisdiction as well. And, you know, without a bylaw or anything, awareness of where people can turn to and enforcing it, other than phoning the police, which someone just mentioned, you know, it's just by the time they get there, it's we've seen it in the police reports when they come to report to us that everybody's gone, you know. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Director Toporowski. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call a question on the motion to refer this back to staff. All in favor? And opposed? That motion is carried. I've been asked if we're interested in taking a break. I'm going to suggest we do that. Let's reconvene at 11:20. That gives us a little over 15 minutes. By consensus, we'll adjourn till 11.
Video's live.
Thank you very much. We are back live, and we will continue where we left off on the agenda. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R4 is a report from Emergency Management Division regarding the Cowichan November 2021 flooding response and recovery, and this report is for information.
Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I have leave to make a comment before I comment on this?
Sure.
I just wanted to clarify in the previous item when I said that the option the staff moved would allow the board to accept or turn down an application. I in no way was saying that I wouldn't keep an open mind. I was meaning that it would give us a chance to decide, is that in a location we're prepared to accept? So thank you. I'll move on to the staff report, which was very comprehensive, very well done. And it was beautifully laid out, and I thank you very much. And mostly I want to thank all of you who worked so hard during the actual events. And I hope you got rested up over the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Any other comments on the report that's before us? Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you. Thorough report. I'm reading with interest that we appear to have done a fair bit of RDA's rapid damage assessments, and I see that the assessments are complete. I'm wondering if there might be any staff to comment on actual repairs and timelines around some of the ones that are still outstanding. I know that there were assessments done of trail infrastructure that were damaged, but we could be looking at quite a time frame before the projects are actually completed. So do we have any information from staff? I guess that would be, well, there's Mr. Elzinga. Thank you.
Mr. Elzinga or Ms. Diver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Director Morrison. Both Ms. Diver and I are able to answer any questions. So the first point that I'd like to put forward is that we had an opportunity with this particular emergency to get some funding from the province through an expenditure authorization form for some additional resources to coordinate a report for you, as well as our recovery plan. So I thank the province for funding the ability to do this and present the information today. A lot of the impacts are obviously in parks and in environment. And so the report speaks to some timelines in the short, the medium term, and the long term. And so we're working our way through those impacts. I know that the board has already reviewed some of the parks related budget impacts around that flood. And we're continuing to work through some of the logistics. I actually just saw from Ms. Diver some information around tipping fees, that we're accepting tipping fees up until February the 13th to be paid for by the province for any flood-related damage. So it's a long-term project for recovery for any of these emergencies. And the intent was just to give some idea to the committee about timelines. I don't see Mr. Farquhar or Ms. Miller on the call today to speak to any specific impacts, but they're certainly part of the recovery team and working through the project.
Thank you very much. I have one question. I was reading through the report, and it's just me. Acronyms are never my friend. Under the recovery section, starting on page 8, I believe, of the report, there's a whole bunch of sectors that are identified as either CI or CL. That's not clear to me, and I have no idea what that means.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll start, but Ms. Diver may chime in with some of that because emergency management does deal with a lot of acronyms. CI is community infrastructure. So recovery plans typically identify through 4 or 5 different streams, whether they're people, whether it's infrastructure. So CI refers to community infrastructure, but I'd turn to Ms. Diver for more information.
No, fair enough. That was all I was looking for, was just some clarification, because some are noted with question marks, but as I note, some of them are municipal jurisdiction, so I get that. I guess the other question, and maybe it's identified in the report and I missed it, but globally, between the remediation, the work we need to do in parks and some of the other issues that are there, and keeping in mind that some of them are municipal jurisdiction, and I get that, but also keeping in mind that it's all the same taxpayer. Do we have a ballpark number for what this is going to cost local governments, excluding the funding we're getting from senior governments for some of this work? Just a rough, is it $1 million? Is it 5 million? Is it 500,000? Is there a ballpark there?
Mr. Chair, I don't see Ms. Wayner on the line, and I don't have that number in front of me. I do want to emphasize to the committee that any activities taken through response period, the immediate response to an emergency, are potentially up to 100% covered. We are working our way through the recovery period now with disaster financial assistance, with potentially 80% covered by the province, 20% covered by local taxpayers. But I don't have in front of me a total of what all of the impacts would be. I don't know if Ms. Diver wants to comment.
Ms. Diver, any thoughts?
Yeah, so we don't have a ballpark because we are currently working through a pre-approval process with the province to identify exactly which costs they're willing to cover 80% and which ones they won't. And until we have that back, we're waiting. The local authorities, so North Cowichan, City of Duncan, are also working through that process.
Thank you. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you just repeat that, Mr. Elzinger, if you wouldn't mind there? I heard figures of 100% covered during this response period activities, and then another of 80% and 20%. Could you just clarify that again for me?
Through the chair to Director Wilson. So it is my understanding, again, I would look to Ms. Diver for any clarification that I miss, but during a response period to an emergency, costs can be covered up to 100% if approved through Emergency Management BC and the province. During a recovery period, costs can be covered up to 80% through a disaster financial assistance program.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Elzinger. That makes it, and what I was looking for, and obviously you've covered it, the response period and a recovery period. There's the distinction there. And I fully appreciate there seeing if we have any kind of estimate, because 20% is still going to come to a lot of money. And if we can get some kind of figure as to what burden, extra burden that might put on our requisition or on our taxpayers, I would appreciate those figures as quickly as possible, because we will be discussing budgets tomorrow, and this will have or may have a huge impact on that. Thank you.
And that was one of the reasons I asked the question. Mr. Elzinga.
One further clarification, Mr. Chair, through to Director Wilson, is that recovery would be funded, but mitigation for another event is not. And so the board will be reviewing in the future any mitigative actions required to make sure this doesn't happen again. My understanding is that that is not funded.
Thank you,
Mr. Sniper, did I get that right?
Yeah, so anything that's built back better rather than built back the way it was is not covered. So yes, there are some rules around what we can submit under response. So during a response, what costs are eligible and which ones are not. And there are also some rules around, obviously, the recovery. So what a local authority can submit to the province for reimbursement, there are some rules there. And so the rules are not super clear, so that's why we need to go through this pre-approval process. So you're looking at anywhere from 20% of covering the cost up to 100% of covering the cost.
But just for clarity, you say it doesn't cover the cost to build back better, but if it were to cost us, for just notionally, if it were to cost us $100,000 to rebuild a piece of infrastructure to its original condition and $150,000 to build back better and deal with it, would that first 100,000 be covered on the 80,000 scale, or because it's built back better, we're responsible for the full 150?
We have to make the argument. So usually they will go for the 100,000 that they need to cover, but you need to clearly make the argument.
Okay, thank you. Director Smith. Director Wilson, you're not done. Go ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, one answer leads to another question, and I appreciate the clarification we're getting here, because obviously the big, as you pointed out, Chair, there are ramifications here as far as we're concerned here. So, and it seems to me that the staff have pointed out that the rules are very unclear as when dealing with the province here on this particular thing, which adds another elasticity to this. We may or may not get the money back, like dealing with a blooming insurance company to a certain extent. So the cost, the possible cost becomes more and more important, because we could be on the hook for 100% or 80%, whichever, or even 20%. We don't know. So the sooner we can get an answer to this, the better, because it's huge. It's big. Thank you very much.
Dr. Smith.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to staff, could you please indicate which function, budget line this will come and go through, just so that when we're looking at our budgets tomorrow, we have a clearer understanding where we might be looking at some additional costs.
Mr. Elzinga.
I'll take a stab at that, Mr. Chair, just to say that it's multiple functions. So it would be multiple areas of the budget that we would be discussing through this. Obviously, we're talking about parks, we're talking about flood mapping, we're talking about a number of different activities relating to different functions. It would be difficult for me to give you a list right now.
Director Smith, supplementary.
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting answer. So tomorrow, when we go into our budget discussion, will there be any indication that a specific budget could have an impact when it comes to the recovery and the mitigation, so that each budget, as we go through them, we have a clearer understanding that there could be some financial changes in there if we're moving, say, some capital reserve or operating reserves in, and they may be needed for something else to do with the mitigation or the recovery. Will that be available to us tomorrow? Thank you.
Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, again, I'll take a stab at that just to say that it would be my expectation that any staff member who has a budget affected would be bringing some information forward, or at least being able to answer some questions. Again, there's long-term impacts in this. There has to be a number of assessments to even determine what some of the costs and damage would be. So we may not have a lot of information today. I do thank Ms. Diver, the Emergency Management Division, and the Finance Division for making a priority to submit the disaster financial assistance documentation into the province. That's been done. So, but we're not going to have all of the answers on individual budget impacts. Staff, as able, will be there to answer questions.
Thank you. Ms. Diver, did you have something to add? I just saw your hand flash up, or was that just a, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to refer the committee to tomorrow's agenda package with the supplemental requests for the Parks and Trails Division that's under Function 280, Regional Parks. And that's the budget that's dealing with the CVT repairs that are required. I believe one set of requests is for 200,000 and the others for 500,000. That would be for the latter being for the Bangs washout, which is a significant one. So the Parks and Trails Division has sort of anticipated worst case scenario in bringing those budget requests forward, but you can have further discussion about that tomorrow. But I just wanted to point you to where they were in tomorrow's agenda package.
Thank you very much. Any other hands on this one? I do have one other question, but I don't want to, I'd like to give other, okay, my question is this. On the floodplain mapping, I mean, we had the two breaches, intentional breaches of the ENN line that were identified through the Halalt territory at their request, and we were told at that point that that would affect the floodplain mapping that had been done, and that would have to be done all over again. Now, it's my understanding the province, EMBC, has agreed to fix those breaches and perhaps put in some culverts. But the last I heard, we were still in discussions as to who was going to pay for that floodplain mapping that had to be redone, because now there's culverts under the rail line where before it was a dike. Have we reached any further conclusion on that floodplain mapping, because it's important? Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to refer you to Mr. Carruthers. We're certainly aware of that issue. I don't personally have an update, but I know Mr. Carruthers may have an update on that.
Mr. Carruthers, has anybody agreed to pay for that, or are we on the hook?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we don't have clarity on that at this point. I just sent a letter last week to senior officials at EMBC and CC'd senior staff at our ministry with regard to our concerns with that, and the fact that the breach has not been repaired to date, and that we're still vulnerable with respect to that situation. So I will be notifying the board as soon as I hear back from my letter.
Appreciate that. I just thought this was an opportune time to get an update on that. All right, I'm not seeing any further hands, so I think we can assume that everybody's happy with the report and it's been received for information. I'll turn to Ms. Legault for the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R5 is another report from the Emergency Management Division regarding emergency support services in the Thetis Island Community Center, Forbes Hall. This report is also for information.
Thank you very much. I'm assuming Director Smith will have something to say on this, and I see her hand went up. Director Smith, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to thank the staff for taking on this project and looking at it seriously. It's an island is definitely different than where most of us sit, and so it was an opportunity to bring this forward for them to ensure that there was a bit of inclusion. I understand that there isn't a possibility of the grant at this time, and as I know staff is always watching grants, I'm sure that if something comes up, they'll be able to identify it and bring it forward. So I do want to thank the staff for their time and an opportunity to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Anybody else? Seeing none, next item, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R6 is a report from Emergency Management regarding Community Emergency Preparedness Fund grant application, and the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board on January 26th, that a grant application in the amount of $115,000 be submitted to the Union of BC Municipalities Community Emergency Preparedness Fund initiative for the purchase of emergency support services generators and supplies to support multiple reception center sites.
Thank you very much. That's moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Questions? I know I have some. I guess to staff, there's just some history here to these generators. I recall when we had the big wind episode in December of 2018, we suddenly discovered that there were generators that were supposed to be in place at the Crofton Community Center and the Senior Center in Chemainus, which had literally walked away. Somebody had stolen them, and we were in quite a pickle in terms of those sub-emergency warming centers being able to open because there were no generators. I note that these, unless I misread the report, these generators are designed to be mobile so we can haul them to where they're needed. Is there any thought to reinstalling permanent fixtures at some of our secondary reception centers, given what happened in 2018? I guess Mr. Elzinger or Ms. Diver.
I can start, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Diver will certainly confirm that permanent generators are not eligible under this particular grant program, and that was part of the discussion we had with Thetis Island. So we are finding a way to get generators, mobile generators are eligible through this particular program.
I guess from a practical perspective, my only concern is, with what happened in that windstorm in 2018, it's nice we have these emergency generators sitting, I presume, at Bings Creek, but how do we get them to Crofton or Chemainus when there's trees across the road, right? So, I'll fully support this motion, but it's just, to me, it's not the be-all or end-all. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And opposed? That motion carries, I believe, unanimously. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no further business items and no requests to participate in question period.
And no closed session. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting at 11:49 a.m. Moved, seconded, all in favor?